yesterday, hours before Donald Trump announced an initial agreement toward ending the war with Iran. We're going to dig into the latest reporting on what's actually in the deal. The devil, as they always say, is in the details. And we don't know yet what's in there. Judging from what both sides are saying, we could be in a worse situation after this war than we were at the beginning. But we're going to talk through that with experts and dig into what we know so far. We're also going to bring you the reporting from Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan, another explosive report coming from their book on secret memos that showed the White House debating last year suspending habeas corpus for undocumented immigrants, and also talking about instituting the Insurrection Act. And which members of the administration were jumping up and down telling the president to do that unconstitutionally. More instances of just pushing right up to the line constitutionally and even going over. We'll give you all of that reporting, and we're going to go through the new polling on the president's approval rating, which continues to plummet as we get closer to the midterm elections. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Joe. It's Monday, June 15th. With us, we have staff writer for The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire, co-host of the Rest is Politics podcast of BBC's Caddy K, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, and columnist and associate editor for The Washington Post, David Ignatius. We're going to talk in 1 minute about the details of the deal. I just want to get first impressions from David and Richard. Okay, wait a second. Okay, before I do that, this is important. Richard, let's run tape of New York City completely losing their head this weekend. Dan, do you have it? Yeah, here we go. So, Richard, as we look at this, I can tell you we have somebody that is new to the Morning Joe team who's actually new to New York City, working in New York City, who, along with the rest of New York, completely lost her mind this weekend and was describing how she ran out after the win and had a party in the streets till 5 a.m. with people that she didn't even know, even though they'd been living right by her for years. It didn't look quite like this, I'm sure. But Richard, talk about just what this win meant to New York. I don't know that I've ever seen anything like it.
You know, this is Joe. As you know, this is a city that's known for many things, but community may not be one of them. This was as spontaneous and as broad as I've seen. Look, it was 53 years in coming. For me, it's a big chunk of my life. I was in college the last time the Knicks won. And suddenly strangers, people who you'd never talk to, much less touch, much less dance with, this was going on everywhere. There were, I don't know, tens of thousands of things like this. Watch parties that broke out into spontaneous celebrations. I've never quite seen it. You know, Joe, I live in a city, you may have noticed this, where like there's a baseball team that's won a lot of championships. I think you've heard of it, the Yankees. A few times a football team that plays in New Jersey, the Giants. But I've never quite seen this, where a city adopted a team, and I think identified with it. And in part, I think it's because of the nature of the Knicks. This was in some ways the greatest team victory. Not one Knick got a vote for I think out of the 50 people who voted for MVP. No Knick made the first All-Star team. Yet, look at this team. What'd they lose? 3 games in the entire playoffs. The differences were remarkable. The comebacks were remarkable. So I just think this was a team that the city identified with, the grittiness, the resilience, and fell in love with.
Well, and Jonathan Lemire literally did keep shouting throughout the night, kids, get the hell off my lawn, and put up the Boston Celtics flag. And so, but no, it was, from everything I've heard, it's unlike anything a New York scene connected to a sporting event in quite some time, and it was widespread. So we'll keep talking about that throughout the show. But first, David, I want to get your impression as well as Richard's on this temporary deal we've reached, and we don't really know exactly what's in it. My concern is, if you look at the language of the deal on nukes, which Donald Trump said this is why he was fighting the war, it is identical, as in plagiarized, as in lifted straight off of Obama's deal. They used the same words. They lifted it off of the Obama deal and put it on this deal, on nukes. So the whole idea that Obama was weak on nukes and he's going to be tougher, if you even read the language of this memorandum of agreement, it's identical. Then you can talk about the okay, well, here's Obama's. Iran affirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. That's July 14th, 2015. Republicans melted down. Donald Trump said it was the worst plan ever, that Iran was going to get a nuclear weapon because of this deal. And this is what Donald Trump says. Iran cannot develop or purchase a nuclear weapon. And actually, it's actually closer than that. I will get it, but it's the identical language. And then you have Donald Trump saying, "Oh, the strait will be open forever for free." Well, no, that's not what the Iranians are saying. There's a 60-day period, and then they expect to start receiving tolls. Regime change. The president had said earlier that we had regime change. Now he's saying he doesn't care about regime change. This regime tougher than the one before, which was pretty bad. And you can just go down the list of what I'm waiting for, talking about the other shoe to drop, is there going to really be reconstruction money for the Islamic Republic of Iran? It sure sounds like it. What's this sanctions relief look like? Because the Trump team told me that Biden giving sanctions relief to the Iranians was the worst thing he ever did. So again, a lot of confusing things. I hope we have us a good, solid deal that keeps Iran contained. Right now, I'm seeing nothing in here, but that would do that. But maybe you can assure me that I haven't read deep enough into the memorandum of understanding.
So, Joe, it's always a good thing when a conflict ends. This is one that's really harmed the global economy. So, yes. If the Strait of Hormuz is reopened, and that seems to be the basic top line of this deal, that will be a good thing for the global economy. It is a long way to go for what appears to be very little in terms of locked-in promises from Iran. It does look very similar to the JCPOA, which Trump scrapped. Some of the provisions may even be somewhat weaker. It's hard to tell because we're just going to begin those negotiations this week and over the next 60 days. But I think in some ways the thing that's most important but seems most unrealistic in this deal is this idea of a broad change in the Middle East, a process where the U.S. over time, if Iran responds positively, begins to pump development money, not just reconstruction, but to build Iranian businesses, and has a vision for Iran becoming, over time, a country more like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates than like the very closed and really impoverished country it's been. If they can do that, if the Iranians are really prepared to make those changes, that would be a significant move into the future. But right now, in terms of what's actually agreed, actually on paper, it's pretty thin. The main achievement is one that I don't want to discount, opening the Strait of Hormuz. But otherwise, not a lot there yet.
Yeah. And let me say, if by some miracle, and it would truly be a miracle going back to 1979, this deal somehow brought Iran into the League of Nations, how wonderful that would be. Also, if the Atlanta Falcons win the next 10 Super Bowls, what a wonderful, wonderful run that will be for all of us who have been suffering with Atlanta since, well, before 1979. But Richard Haas, I want to read you now. I have the exact language. Here is the language in the understanding that was signed. Iran affirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. Got that? That sounds pretty tough. Here, is a preamble to the 2015 JCPOA that Trump tore up. Iran affirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. You are literally looking at the same exact words. And as far as the strait goes, Donald Trump says, well, it's going to be toll-free forever. No, that's not what the Iranians believe. They believe that after 60 days, they're going to be able to start charging insurance, start charging other fees. That's at least what they're saying. And regime change, we've all talked about it. The regime is actually more hardened. They're angrier. They have more of a reason to seek and build out their military capabilities than they did before, because the United States did attack. I guess my question is, can you find a single area where if you look at the strait, if you look at regime change, if you look at nukes, where we are in a better position today than we were under Barack Obama's deal before the war?
The short answer, I'm sorry to say, Joe, is no. And let's just break it into those three parts. The strait, yes, will be reopened. That's a good thing. But you'd have to believe in the tooth fairy to think it will remain open unconditionally to all without a toll. I think it's a question of when, not if. Not only do the Iranians start adding a toll, but at some point they'll deny access. Just say there's a new crisis with Israel and a country is shipping arms to Israel. I expect it's quite possible that Iran will close the strait to the ships, to ships carrying oil or goods to that country. So, that's one thing. On the nuclear, where you read the language, it's not just that it's similar, that is nothing more than a statement of intention. And as we've learned over the years in arms control, what really matters is not statements of intention, it's capabilities. So the real question with the nuclear is, what is Iran going to be sign up to, and can it be verified? And there's been a remarkable lack of conversation here about the verification capabilities. What about international inspectors? What kind of information is Iran going to be required to provide on a regular basis so inspectors have the access they need? And so there's that entire detailed area. And then last, the people of Iran are really among the big losers here. Why? Because we're going to be transferring enormous sums of money. Either we're going to release frozen assets, ease sanctions. Iran is going to make a lot of money. That's going to shore up, as you said, Joe, this even harder line regime. So I actually think Iran is going to be farther away from the kind of broad systemic regime change that actually it wasn't that far away from before this war broke out.
Yeah, Jonathan, it's one of the many reasons why Israel is so dead set against this. What they see is an enraged Iran with more radical leadership. You have the Revolutionary Guard now running it, and the most hardened elements of the Revolutionary Guard. They believe, and as Richard said, everybody around these talks believe that 60 days in, they're going to start charging tolls. And then you look at the sanctions relief they're going to get, which, again, the Trump administration, as you know, constantly berated Joe Biden's administration for lifting sanctions against Iran from time to time. They're going to do it, and we have talk of reconstruction if Iran behaves well down the road. I mean, as Richard said, and again, the devil's in the details. We're really glad there's a possibility that this war, which should have never started, comes to an end. But let's just tell it like it is. If people want to be lied to, go to another channel, because I can tell you which channel to go to. They will be lying through your teeth to you right now, telling you how wonderful this is. But if you want to know the truth of what's happening right here, the fact is, Jonathan, people in the neighborhood around Iran have every reason to be scared to death right now, because this is a more radical, a more enraged, and soon to be richer Iran thanks to this war.
Yeah, we'll tell it like it is. This is a defeat for the United States. Iran is stronger now than they were at the beginning of the war. How often do we hear not just of President Trump complaining about the sanction relief that the Biden administration gave Iran, but think about all the pallets of cash that he would blast the Obama team for sending to Tehran. That's going to be dwarfed by the amount of money that's likely going there now. On the Strait of Hormuz, not only is A, after 60 days, Iran has indicated they believe they'll charge for tolls, but B, despite President Trump's celebration last night about the strait being open and free for everyone to use, A, that obviously that's temporary, but also it already was. Before the war, that was the status quo. That's how things existed. He made things worse. We now have a hardline regime embittered and certainly no reason to ever trust the United States again because we keep bombing them during the midst of negotiations. Let's think about the cost here, not just the billions upon billions in terms of dollars the United States spent, but also the lives lost, civilians, including a girls' school in the first hours of the war. This is a significant, the United States looks significantly weaker right now in that region than before, and Iran's ability to close the Strait of Hormuz and hit its neighbors seems, unchecked. And Caddy, the other subplot here is the relationship with Israel. Joe just voiced the concerns that many in Jerusalem have with this deal. Well, let's go even further. President Trump gave a series of interviews, quick phone calls with people yesterday, really blasting Prime Minister Netanyahu in extraordinary, blunt terms, criticizing the attacks yesterday in Lebanon, telling the New York Times he's a very difficult guy. And to be honest with you, he should be very thankful for us for this. Just completely eviscerating the man who went into this war with because Trump was so desperate to get a deal done as quickly as can, and ideally before his UFC birthday party last night.
Yeah, the president seems to have woken up to the fact that the U.S. aims and the Israeli aims when it comes to the Middle East at the moment are not aligned. And although Prime Minister Netanyahu may have sold a more optimistic version than many, even the Israeli cabinet, believed to President Trump, he's now realized that actually they are not on the same page. And it looked over the weekend like this was an attempt, both by perhaps Hezbollah, but also by the Israelis, to scuttle this deal. And that infuriated, clearly, President Trump. I think that we don't know what the longer-term deal is going to look like, but one of the things I think we have to all focus on is the detail. The JCPOA was 150 pages long. It took 20 months to negotiate, and it was that long and that detailed because they didn't want to leave anything to chance. And the main thing they didn't want to leave to chance was the inspection program around the nuclear program. At the moment, there's no discussion of an inspection program, and without an inspection program, this is just the Israelis signing on to, as you say, an idea of not having nuclear weapons, which most of the people I've spoken to who know Iran much better than I do say at the moment they wouldn't trust the Iranians to stick by what they signed. So there has to be a much more detailed program, and there has to be a much more detailed inspections program. Otherwise, this is just wishful thinking. And we are back to February the 27th, having spent an enormous amount of money and done a lot of damage to other countries' economies around the world.
Yeah, and going to the specifics, we don't have the specifics. There's been some reporting of the language that I was reading earlier. Right now, all we have, actually, so let me clarify, is that Donald Trump said that Iran can never develop or purchase nuclear weapons. As far as going in and getting nuclear weapons or getting the nuclear dust, David Ignatius, that obviously would be difficult. But once again, you have the president saying, oh, well, there's no rush on that. Just like you have the president saying on regime change, oh, we were never for regime change, when, of course, the president was talking about how regime change had been made. And again, the same thing with the Strait of Hormuz. A great point brought up by Jonathan Almir, that the Strait was open before the war. Now, the president says it's going to be open and free forever. That certainly is not what we're hearing from the negotiations. Iran believes 60 days in, they're going to be able to start making money off the Strait again.
So in each of these terms, Joe, we have aspiration for fixed terms that would be beneficial, but what we have really is no more than a promise from Iran to negotiate, to talk about them. On the removal of the highly enriched uranium, the 440 kilograms that Iran has, it seems to me, as I read this closely, that Trump has basically stepped down from his demand that this be removed from Iran by the United States, and instead accepted what was Iran's offer before this ever began, back on February 27, to dilute this down so it was no longer threatening. That was, my understanding, the final Iranian offer. So it's one more example of going a long way to get very little. Again, when you have a war in the Middle East, the terms are always going to be messy, and it's going to take a while back and forth to figure out exactly what they mean. The interesting thing behind the scenes has been the process of negotiation. The principal mediators have been the Qataris. They've had contacts, I think, with elements of the Revolutionary Guard we haven't been reading about, that the Trump administration is trying to move into positions of greater responsibility. But for now, we have this simple declaration that goes to the number one issue, reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And even there, we're not sure exactly how it's going to work.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge when we do find the language and get all of the details. If we do within the next 60 days, whenever we get that, I think the burden's going to really be on the White House to show how we're in a better position after this deal than we were before. Before we spent billions and billions of dollars on this war, before there were thousands of civilians killed, including over 150 at a girls' school on the opening night of the war, and also working Americans who have been struggling since this war began with inflation at its highest level in years, gas prices at its highest levels in years. Let's hope that moves forward and Americans get back to being able to afford their gas and their groceries and their rent. But that's not where we are right now. This war's made it worse. And on top of that, I'll just say, as an Iran hawk, on top of that, are we supposed to just trust Iran? Because that's what Barack Obama was attacked for by Donald Trump, because we were left in a position to trust them on nukes, except actually the Obama administration and those negotiators actually went into great detail and actually held them to a much higher standard than apparently where we are even now. We'll see what happens. Devil's in the details. Let's hope it breaks the way the president says it's going to break. There's no reason to believe that's going to happen right now, but we will see soon enough. The Washington Post's David Ignatius, thanks so much. And still ahead of Morning Joe, we're going to be digging into brand new reporting by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan.
Regime change, which will be released next Tuesday. They detail a memo dated April the 29th of 2025 from Will Scharf, an arch-conservative lawyer serving as the White House staff secretary, with the subject line of the writ of habeas corpus. The Constitution, Mr. Scharf wrote in his memo to Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, permits suspension of habeas corpus only in cases of rebellion or invasion. Courts have almost uniformly held that only Congress can do it. Mr. Scharf did not say what Mr. Trump should do, but the implication was plain. Suspension of habeas rights without congressional authorization would almost certainly be found unlawful, and the court fight would become a huge self-inflicted distraction. Suspending habeas corpus was one of two radical ideas that Stephen Miller, yes, that Mr. Miller, had been pushing that alarmed Mr. Scharf. The other was invoking the Insurrection Act to deploy the military to enforce the law on American streets as protests grew against deportation sweeps. That discussion came to a head in late January, after federal agents had shot and killed 2 U.S. citizens who had been voicing their opposition to the administration's deportation policies in Minnesota. Haberman and Swan report that days after the killing of Alex Pretty, Susie Wiles had a meeting in her West Wing office where Vice President J.D. Vance said the administration needed to invoke the Insurrection Act swiftly to crush the unrest in Minnesota. The meeting broke up without a decision, a vague consensus to keep thinking about it, but had been clarifying in its own way. Even after the administration's posture had helped escalate tensions in Minnesota, even with the blowback mounting, the vice president and Mr. Miller were still searching for a reason to put federal troops on American streets. Joe, we know that Stephen Miller has wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act. We know from General Milley that President Trump wanted to do it in the first administration as well. What's been amazing about Jonathan and Maggie's reporting is to get right in the room where these discussions were taking place.
They were, as the song goes, they were in the room where it happened. And what is so shocking is what actually was said inside those rooms time and time again. And Jonathan Lemire, you actually have the Vice President of the United States talking about invoking the Insurrection Act. Talk about an unconstitutional use of power. Invoking the Insurrection Act to crush American citizens protesting in American streets. And as Maggie and Jonathan wrote, this was after they had already gunned down two innocent Americans for doing just that, for protesting. And yet they're still talking about enacting the Insurrection Act. They're still talking about suspending habeas corpus through this entire period. You know, maybe it's just the lawyer in me, but excerpts from this book are reading, whether you look at Todd Blanche trying to cover up one of the biggest pedophile rings in the history of America, or you have the vice president and Stephen Miller talking about suspending habeas corpus and the Insurrection Act. That sure does look like a place where a lot of lawyers in the future are going to start discovery in their investigations, whether it is with a Democratic Congress, whether it is with prosecutors, because the president may try to pardon a lot of people. It's not going to be able to pardon the entire government. And these just seem to be clearly illegal acts or a conspiracy to commit illegal acts. No wonder, and I know you've heard this like I've heard this, no wonder the White House is melting down over this book, because there's so many people who are exposed who are going to have to hold up the right hand at some point and take an oath and tell everybody what happened behind those closed doors, because even the glimpse we're getting from this book is ugly.
Yeah, ugly, as you say, illegal and deeply un-American. I mean, this is extraordinary. Both of these revelations in this new piece. I mean, as the Times writes about the Insurrection Act debate, that Vance says it needs to invoke the Insurrection Act to crush the unrest in Minnesota, and this is because he says that this because outside agitators and the like are fueling this. Even though at that moment, of course, the White House is already realizing that neither Alex Preddy nor Miss Good, neither of them were paid. These were not, Antifa or whatever nonsense they wanted to put out there. These were just average Americans who were trying to protest what they saw was un-American behavior by these ICE agents on the streets of Minneapolis. You're right to say that the White House is freaking out about this book. There was even an Axios report over the weekend that there's fears that perhaps the Times reporters have recordings from inside the Situation Room, which would be an extraordinary step, and they're worried about that. Let's also remember here, these are floated. They were not enacted. Doesn't mean they won't be down the road. And I think that's some discussion even this morning we're having here is like, if the Insurrection Act was floated then, who's to say it can't come back at some point, perhaps in front of the midterm elections? So we're still sifting through this new reporting from Maggie and Jonathan on the Times website, dropped this morning. That new book coming out this month. Undoubtedly, there will be more in it. Coming up here on Morning Joe, we're going to talk with Democratic Senator Raphael as his state prepares for a special session to
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं गए जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम अब बहुत ही डूबता है। अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं, ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं। तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है। दिल का हर एक कोना बहुत ही दर्द भरता है। मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं। तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं। कहाँ जाऊं कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा, तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू, मेरी रूह का मका तू। लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था। वफा की इस कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था। सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा, मगर खामोश है दुनिया, कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा। बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत। मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत। साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर। साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर, दर्द का असर।